All right, done with the Brent Johnson report. I guess I can catch up on the under-18s now. All right, Belarus is playing Switzerland. Let's check it out. Uh-huh. Okay, welcome to the 11th Scouching Report for the 2021 NHL Entry Draft, and today we're going to be profiling that guy. Oh, you thought Yuri Tiacek was the only small defenseman we were going to pump up a little before this draft? No, we're only getting started. So today we're looking at Dmitri Kuzmin, who plays for Dinamo-Molodechno, I think is how you pronounce it in Belarus, but probably not how you pronounce it, so I apologize to my Belarusian viewers. All I know is that they're Dynamo Minsk in the KHL's farm team, and that's really where we'll leave it. So lacrosse goals aside, Dmitri Kuzmin is one of the most fun and interesting defenders that I have seen play this season at all. And him showing the world what he's capable of at this under-18 tournament was a welcome, but if I'm being perfectly honest, kind of expected surprise for me. Kuzmin caught my eye very early in the season, and I was very pleased to find out that the Flint Firebirds not only had drafted him in the import draft, but had an agreement for him to come over should the OHL come back, which it unfortunately didn't. While being undersized, I noted his skill and skating ability and thought, I should keep an eye on this guy and probably track a few games because even though he's playing in the Belarusian Pro League, it's not a joke of a league and he is playing some big minutes, so I wanted to see what was going on there. I mean, it's a top division professional league in a team that is always in the World Championships, and he was playing top pairing minutes from the get-go as a draft-eligible defender standing 5'8". So before we get started, I do have to say that the Belarusian Pro League is not the most competitive of leagues, but I found that the level of play in that league was better than I expected, especially playing against perennial champions Yunost Minsk. So 4 of the 7 games I tracked were against that team, and that does break a rule of mine where I don't like to track players against the same team over and over and over again, but in this specific situation it seemed to make a bit more sense considering these two teams were a bit of the powerhouses of the league. And the last game I tracked, I do have to note, was Dmitri Kuzmin sent down to the 3rd division in Belarus to play with Dinamo-Molodechno's farm team. And, I mean, that game was laughably silly at times, but across the board in that game, Kuzmin's data didn't take an enormous jump in almost every metric I track. So Dmitri Kuzmin is a player who I think is characterized by passive but strong defensive play and aggressive, skilled offensive play. His defensive transition involvement was just 19.9%, but when he did get involved, he broke up those transitions 73% of the time. And flipping things over to the offensive side of the game, he was involved in 30% of his team's offensive transitions, which puts him in pretty elite company in my tracking with names like Luke Hughes, Corson Ceulemans, and he actually beats Brandt Clark, who also played against men in a professional league this season when it comes to maintaining control on those offensive transitions. And another really important thing to note, especially when we're looking at offensive-leaning defensemen like Kuzmin, of this group of defensemen that are really highly involved in offensive transitions for their team, Kuzmin's team with him on the ice took 69% the rate of shot attempts of any of those other 3 defensemen. And Kuzmin was either taking or creating 37% of his team's shot attempts with him on the ice. And that puts him on par with Luke Hughes when it comes to the percentage of his team's shot attempts where Kuzmin is either taking them or creating them. Similar to the VHL in Russia, hockey in Belarus at times can just simply put be a mess. And there were many times where Dmitri Kuzmin found himself just locked in the defensive zone, unable to really generate much of any kind of offensive breakout. But when it did come time for Kuzmin to break up cycles defensively, and just as a side note, what I consider a cycle is any offensive possession by an opponent with 2 or more completed passes or retrieved shot attempts by the team taking those shot attempts. Kuzmin is one of 5 players I've tracked all season that have surpassed 10 defensive zone cycle breaks per 60 minutes of 5-on-5 this year. And he trails 2 players that played in the MHL, Vsevolod Gaidamak and Dmitry Zugan. But he did beat some pretty interesting names on defense like Brandt Clark and Brent Johnson. So on the defensive side, Kuzmin's team might not be doing him a whole lot of favors, but when he is getting involved, he's doing pretty well when he does so. Flipping things to the offensive side, Kuzmin shines as well. He is one of just 5 defensemen I've tracked this season that is over 8 dangerous pass attempts per 60 minutes. And while on average he's completing the second fewest of those attempts of those defensemen, considering the rarity with which his team had the puck for extended possessions in the offensive zone, Kuzmin was very much involved in trying to create offense for his team, I would say as best as he could. So to break down the how and what it is that Kuzmin does that makes him such an interesting player, I think it's best to start with what makes him such a questionable prospect in the NHL draft, because some issues to me are self-evident, and some also come with the territory of being a bit of an undersized defender. So for starters, Dmitri Kuzmin is just a bit too passive on defensive entries. He is only involved in 20% of those defensive transitions, which is not necessarily super high. And this is driven through a bit of a lack of backwards and lateral mobility and far too passive gap control a little bit too often that just removes him from play defensively. And he is 5'8", and I would certainly not call him a legitimate defensive physical threat at all. And in defensive situations that aren't rush defense, there are moments that are just plain misreads of opponents, and he doesn't really have the agility or quickness to really counter that. So for all the positives we're going to go over very shortly, I can't deny that Dmitri Kuzmin is a long shot. He's going to need to work on his pure and raw quickness and speed in multiple directions on his feet, and especially in open ice in situations like puck retrievals as I'm displaying here. In motion, under pressure, he can be far too easy to beat, and if he's beaten with a few steps here and there, he just doesn't follow up with the defensive intensity to close out that play. Even in the Belarusian 3rd Division game I tracked, I don't know if Kuzmin just knew he was punching below his weight class, but he just felt really flat-footed defensively and inactive and passive, and not really that much of a factor in the defensive zone, often relying on opponents to make mistakes or for opponents to bring pucks to him for him to then separate. So while his defensive controlled zone transition percentage is fine, I did feel that it was a little bit too easy to beat him defensively a little bit too often, mostly relying on the fact that he's not the most mobile or fluid skater in 4 directions under tight pressure. On the plus side in this area though, there were some improvements that I did note. In the first game I tracked, he completely lost track and got caught puck watching with a man standing right in front of the net, and it led to the only goal against that I tracked of his in the 7-game sample of mine. But that's the only time I felt that his sense of positioning kinda waned, and it was in the first game of the year that I tracked. So this might be a good point to turn around and start making things look a little bit better. So for all the time that it was pretty apparent that his team was locked in the defensive zone, Dmitri Kuzmin's rate of dangerous shot attempts against was very good, and he currently sits 13th in that measure and 19th in defensive controlled zone transition percentage. And with the issues that we just went over, how is all of this possible? How is he so good at suppressing those dangerous shot attempts against? And Kuzmin might not be the fastest or most fluid skater on his feet, but I would categorize him as quick. Quickness with the first couple of steps might be a bit lackluster, but his pivoting ability and ability to challenge you very, very quickly and unexpectedly is really impressive. He comes at you stick first, and he comes at you hard. Beyond his first step after a pivot, continuously generating speed is a bit of an issue, but that first step or two to change directions and challenge opponents when he chooses to do so is pretty solid. And another thing I picked up on is that his sense of awareness and space in the neutral zone allows him to pick off breakouts really, really effectively in open ice. This is a great open ice defender like a player like Samuel Knazko was last year, and it allowed him to block almost 75% of the offensive exits where he was involved. And once he does get the puck on his stick, he has a pretty short-looking stick, and he's able to use quick hands to navigate open ice, open lanes, and move pucks around where opponents are not. He moves pucks around the ice with skill and precision and purpose, and he's a hard worker who can separate pucks in transition with just solid effort and a solid first step, and leading with his stick first, he can separate pucks in transition effectively. Using a quick first step coming out of a pivot, he also steps directly into passing lanes effectively to turn play around that way, and he certainly had lots of practice with a sloppy pass here or there in the Belarusian Pro League. So there's a sense of awareness with Dmitri Kuzmin that allows him to get involved in gap control without having to close those gaps necessarily. He wasn't necessarily applying a tremendous amount of pressure, but he was very incisive and surgical when he did, and caused plenty of turnovers doing so. But the real magic is what happens when Kuzmin has the puck on his stick. Kuzmin is a left-hand shot defenseman that was playing on the right side of the ice in almost every single situation that I tracked. And with a defenseman playing on their offside, their natural stick positioning keeps the puck towards the midline of the ice, which removes the benefit of using the boards to your advantage to protect the puck. But Kuzmin has the hand skill and the determination and resiliency on the puck to pull that puck towards the boards on his backhand or even with one hand, drive deep down into the offensive zone and try to create a play from down low. He also uses this skill to protect possession and keep opponents guessing in multiple ways in open ice or in the neutral zone or in the offensive zone trying to create play. And I'd say that I see a lot of potential as a really strong one-on-one skilled defenseman that can challenge opponents and try to embarrass them here and there. And he does try to do these things and tries to pull pucks around and tries to get around guys, but there isn't necessarily enough pace or quickness or pure skill level to do any of these things consistently against professional competition right now. But he finds plenty of success as a perimeter playmaker trying to drive play along the boards and using his skill and quickness to his advantage around that area of the ice. And to me, for his profile, I find that to be a little bit more projectable. But if he does continue to work on his skating and skill and does learn how to do this on a more consistent basis against men, I'm all for it. I want to see more of it. I'm just trying to turn Dmitri Kuzmin into an NHL player because he's a ton of fun to watch. His speed in open ice is, I would consider, decent, but I would say also not good enough for a small defenseman like him. But with that speed and the skill in his hands, he's got deception and vision to control pucks through offensive transitions and really quarterback a rush here and there. If he's got possession of the puck in the offensive zone, he can walk the offensive blue line if he doesn't see a lane to go down low into the corners. He can open up the ice, move around opposing defensemen, identify passing lanes that are around in the offensive zone, and consistently found line mates through dangerous areas in every single game I tracked at least once. With Kuzmin, I see a real playmaker's instinct here. He is a confident and aggressive defenseman in the offensive zone. And like I said, he on paper is trying to drive a lot of his team's offense, and he plays on a men's professional team in Belarus. So yes, Kuzmin is small, and yes, there are issues that very well could hold him back from being an NHL player. But in my view, he is a legitimate NHL prospect that has far more pros than cons, and the things that need to be worked on can be improved with time. And how he generates his results, which were largely very good, are built on strong fundamentals that should project. But at the end of the day, Kuzmin is also just a ton of fun to watch, whether he's scoring lacrosse goals or not. So what's the best part of Dmitri Kuzmin's game? And to me, it's pretty simple. His skill level for a defenseman is awesome. It's so fun. He's so much fun to watch. I could watch him play all day. He's so skilled, creative, and aggressive with that skill. He attacks the offensive zone with solid quickness, but really, really good skill. And while he challenges players one-on-one in open ice and tries to deke around them here and there, and he isn't successful all of the time, I certainly don't mind him trying on an offensive rush, and if it does get better, yeah, he could be an even better offensive defenseman than he already could be. His skill unlocks a heck of a lot of tools with the puck on his stick. He can evade pressure defensively, he can open up new lanes to rush or pass a puck, he can try to take on opponents one-on-one, he can try to keep defenders guessing all over the ice to try to open up the ice a little bit, and he does all of these things better than a lot of the defensemen that I have tracked this season, especially when you look at the ones that might not be outside of the top end of the board. The good part of his game is the first step or two coming out of a pivot with Kuzmin. He's able to change directions very, very quickly and cover a short amount of distance very, very quickly as well to cut off loose pucks, challenge defenders when he chooses the time to do so. And this area of the game does allow him to overcome his size deficiencies at least a little bit. He'll need to be better generating speed after that first step or two coming out of a pivot, but his ability to step into lanes for a valuable fractions of a second, cut off defensive transitions, turn play around offensively, and just do the right things more often, led to a number of very, very valuable turnovers for his team. And this first couple steps of quickness and pivoting ability, combined with his skill, when you move him into the offensive zone, allowed him to attack defenses very, very well, push deep into the offensive zone, get below the goal line, and drive playmaking here and there. And over time, his ability to manage and evade pressure should get even better than it already is with improvements in this quickness. Now for the not so good part, and this should be relatively straightforward. We know the drill. Dmitri Kuzmin is small. I can't deny that. And he's a small defender who does have very clear strength deficiencies. So that's not necessarily the thing that I would highlight here. But what I would highlight is that while Kuzmin is quick through pivots, he's not necessarily a very fluid or mobile four-directional skater for a defenseman right now. And in turn, that leads to gap management that really left a lot to be desired for me. He could be taken out of play far too often, and especially for a defender, you don't really want that. And especially if that aggressive neutral zone pinch doesn't work, or his first layer stick defense doesn't really work on defensive entries either. But I will also say that with defensemen, I'm not necessarily so concerned about lack of strength as a big issue that could withhold him from the NHL, but they do need to make up for it in other areas of the game. And the feet and stick can do a tremendous amount of work for a defender if you really know how to use them and you're quick and you're agile, and we saw a lot of that with a player like Yuri Tihacek in my opinion. With Kuzmin, he's not as active a defender as Tihacek. He's not as involved defensively as Tihacek was. And he didn't really have the pace or escape gear right now that Tihacek does. But if it does improve over the next few years, like it probably could, as of right now, there's more offensive flair on display with Kuzmin than Tihacek. And in my view, if his development goes very well, there could be a much more dynamic two-way threat, both dangerous at the offensive and defensive end here with Dmitri Kuzmin than a player like Yuri Tihacek. So Dmitri Kuzmin to me has been a fascinating case study to say the least. I love players like this, the enigmatic ones who don't make a lot of sense in terms of traditional hockey thinking, but still manage to drive really good results considering the situation they're in. Kuzmin is an aggressive defender. He's willing to recognize space, step into that open ice, pinch up and cut off breakouts in the neutral zone, and he pressures opponents with intensity and a solid pivot ability and quickness as an incisive and surgical defensive player. This instinct feeds into his offensive game as he can jump into the offensive zone, make a play, be a dangerous offensive defenseman, and when you combine an adaptive pivoting ability with his ability to receive passes along the blue line in the offensive zone, he's able to change angles very well. His skill and hands are remarkable, and he certainly showed that off more than once in the Belarusian Pro League this year, and most recently, of course, in the under-18s. And all of these things blended together make a very fascinating group of talents to work with. It creates a unique brand of defender that kind of sits outside the typical style of defense that we typically see in the NHL. And if you're willing to take a bit of a risk, I think there could be huge value potential here with Kuzmin. Whether or not he comes to the Flint Firebirds, he could be playing in the KHL as soon as next season, which is not a bad place to be playing hockey. And if you can live with the shortcomings that are there in his game and hope that he can build things up to a competent level defensively and nurture him and coach him to be as exciting and dynamic as he possibly can be, I think this is a player that is not only worth drafting, but worth really valuing pretty well. I just love watching Dmitri Kuzmin play hockey. I'll be very curious to see if he's drafted and by whom and what their plans for him might be. But if it's me, I would be excited to work with him and move his career in the right direction because I think there are very interesting traits to work with him. He's fun, he's creative, and he's aggressive. On paper, he's better defensively than you might expect. And while there are contextual things that might color that a little bit more negatively than the on-paper results, it is a strong fundamental starting point. And yes, while strength is obviously an issue, I have a bigger issue with his ability to generate speed with multiple strides. And his ability to execute on decisions and accurately identify the right outlet options was a bit spotty with him, so I feel like more experience will improve that trait in his game, but that also will be something that needs to improve. He can move up the ice decently well, but I didn't really see the same kind of escape gear that I saw out of a player like Yuri Tihacek. He's got great hands, and he's got a great ability to manipulate his view of the ice, but his pass selection at times felt needlessly aggressive, and sometimes you just sit there wondering what he's doing sending passes directly into single or even double coverage on breakouts. You don't really want to see your puck-moving defenseman do this very often, so for as fun as Dmitri Kuzmin is, there is work to be done, and you're gonna need to be patient. But if he works around strengthening his fundamentals, raising the floor of his deficiencies, settling into a more responsible game, not biting off more than he can chew, he could be an excellent puck-moving defenseman through carries and passes down the road. So if he's a player available in the mid to late rounds, I do think you could do much worse. And to close, I also just really like fun, and to me, sports are also a little bit about entertainment as well. And in my view, hockey should be more fun, and we should be encouraging players to be more fun, and we should be encouraging teams to draft more fun players, especially if the results that they show on the ice are not necessarily poor. You might think they might be poor by looking at his size and his profile, but he's not awful. He's driving pretty good results on a not-so-great offensive team in a men's league where the winner of that league goes to the Champions Hockey League to play against the best European clubs. And well, to me, Dmitri Kuzmin is fun, and he's got the skill and the excitement factor that will not only get fans in your arena to potentially see him if things go really well with his development, but he also has the talent to get them out of their seats during games when he's on the ice. So that's it for this Scouching Report. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, you can click all the buttons you see below me so you never miss another one. If you really liked it, you could subscribe on Patreon or here on YouTube by clicking join below. You'll get early access to videos, exclusive written reports, a Discord server, data sheets for hundreds of drafted and undrafted prospects, as well as plenty of other goodies, or you can pick up some merchandise from the Scouchwear shop, where 50% of profits go to the Women's Sports Foundation. So that's all, and we'll see you in the next one.